because it's the change that we make now, today, and tomorrow, and in this decade that's going to be the difference to whether we lose this race or not. So that's enough from me. I'd like to bring on board our first speaker for our conversation, Kumi Kitamori, the Head of Green Growth and Global Relations, who's at the OECD, who's going to talk to us about the perspectives of government in the race to zero. Kumi. Sit down. Yeah, sit next to me. Sit closer. Hi, Kumi. Okay. So, with that intro, the race to zero and beyond. First of all, tell us a bit about your personal journey into the role that you have at the OECD. And then if you segue into what are some of the effective strategies that governments can use to address climate change, and how specifically is OECD supporting countries do what they need to?
Okay, well, hello everybody, good afternoon, and good to be chatting with you, Dean. So thank you for the introduction. So a little bit about myself before we get to the topic for today, this afternoon. So Kumi Kitamori, I'm from Japan originally, but I have not lived there for many, many decades. I actually live in France since 2000. And my entire career has been dedicated to environmental sustainability, mostly advising different governments. Now I'm at the OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And this is basically a club of, now we have 38 member countries that are market-based economy, democracies, like-minded, etc. And we are striving for better policies for better lives and also better policies for better environment. So, so that's what I do for my career, advising governments on environmental policy and also climate change, because that is a top priority for our member governments today. And a little bit of on what can governments do in terms of the raising ambition for the net zero future we want. As of today, over 120 countries have announced their goal to achieve net zero economy by mid-century. So mid-century, that's long term. But at the same time, if you look at the countries' near-term targets for 2030, that's where we only have 7-8 years to go, the trajectories, if they are to implement all the actions and plans of reduction in emissions by 2030, we are nowhere close to achieving the global goal of keeping temperature increase to less than 1.5 degrees by next century. So there's something that's needed to ramp up the action and how to turn all these plans and pledges and aspirations into concrete action in terms of government policy. Just a word on government policies. So as we know, climate change is not just an environmental problem for Environment Ministry. This is something that's a massive economy-wide challenge that requires action by Economy, Finance Ministry, and all the other line ministries, because it's these policies in energy, transport, agriculture, industry, all these different areas. These are the changes needed where these are the ministries that hold the lever for the changes that need to happen in these different sectors. So therefore, the need for alignment of policies across different policy areas or domains. And we do have, so it's easy to say, but actually it's hard to implement because we have examples of misalignment of policies. Let's take one government, or most governments, are taking some form of support to promote renewable energy in power sector. But the same government, using the other hand, is giving a lot of support for continuing production and consumption of fossil fuels. So there's a little bit of discrepancy there. So OECD is trying to help countries to better align policies across different ministries and areas, so that we can turn the economy around towards to meet the net zero goal.
Now we talk a lot in this world, and in the specific race to zero world, about the ambition loop. There's positive feedback. Governments create the enabling policy. It allows business to go further, and that that sector leadership, it just reinforces each other. And you talked about that, the economy-wide approach, all the different stakeholders involved in this. So what are the specifics? How can the private sector, with the support of governments, obviously, contribute to the race to net zero emissions?
Yeah. So as I said, I work mostly with governments, but of course, governments alone cannot solve the problems. There's a lot that needs to be done really, or be led by the companies and businesses in the private sector, both in the real economy and in the financial sector. So I would say probably innovation is one of the critical things that really needs further push today. All the net zero technologies, green technologies that are needed to achieve the goal by mid-century are not yet commercially available right now. So there's a need to push this innovation frontier, and this is where governments can support by giving this a little bit of help, for example, in R&D support, but governments have to really look at this more mission-oriented innovation policy approach throughout the entire innovation life cycle. So it's not just about R&D support, but also by supporting demonstration projects for hopeful green approaches or new technologies. And also by creating markets and demand, for example, through green public procurement. And also carbon pricing can also be an incentive for businesses and innovators to push and then accelerate what's needed for the green future. But there's probably one little caveat here, because governments are usually not the best picker of winners when we come to different potential new technology for the future. And we all know the good example, famous example of, for the last global and financial crisis 10 years ago, US government poured in millions of dollars for support for hopeful startup of a new photovoltaic company. And after all this public money has been spent, the company went bust, right? And another company that actually benefited from such public money was Tesla. And the rest is history. So governments cannot always necessarily judge very well. So government can create this more policy framework, but leave the commercialization and the rest to the market. So that's what we usually tend to advise the government with.
True collaboration with them. And that bodes well for many of the startups, innovators that we've got here today, that are going to be the big companies of the future, right? With Larry Fink's prediction, and that's where it's going.
Maybe I can mention one more thing. I mentioned the real economy, but also the financial sector. So another area where OECD is working quite a lot is how to help investors to have the confidence in their investment and projects that are labeled as being green. So there's a lot of potential greenwashing that could be happening. So where OECD is helping with this is the development of environment, social, and governance a rating or criteria that are, as of today, not harmonized globally. There are different jurisdictions. We know the EU is doing their own thing, and the Atlantic and the Pacific. There are different, it's a good thing. There's a lot of activities there, but I think there's some kind of a harmonization and coordination that's needed in different jurisdictions. So this is the kind of things that OECD is helping with.
Yeah, you said there are different needs in different regions, different countries, but learning from each other and that harmonization, especially for sort of cross-border industry, incredibly important. So that's finance, government, and business. So we've got those key stakeholders in these systems. What about the missing piece of the puzzle then? Is that enough that government and business do something? How do we get the citizen, the public involved and behind climate action?
Yeah, so let's talk about people. So as I mentioned, I've been working in this area. Well, I'm heading the green growth work for many years at the OECD. Let's say 10 years ago, the main concern for governments, especially in the aftermath of the last global financial and economic crisis, was to find new source of growth, new green recovery, green growth, but finding new source of growth with an engine of growth driven by innovation. And then how to make the green goals compatible with productivity growth. So that was 10 years ago. Not to say that it's not important anymore, it still is. But more recently, the new challenge is how to make the green goals compatible with social inclusiveness. And as we all heard about this just transition and how that is really the key to bring everybody along in this journey for a net zero future. It's because, as we know, when there are policy changes, there are some winners and losers that's created in any policy change that governments introduce. And when it comes to the net zero policies or green policies to address climate change, there are impacts on workers and also impacts on households and you and I citizens. So clearly, the workers who, if we take example of, say, coal miners, clearly it's been talked about a lot in policy domain, how to make sure that the just transition will bring along these people who might fear for their future, that their sector that they work in might shrink or even disappear in the future net zero world. And then for household, as we know today, even we have energy price volatility and increase from different reasons. But if we are to talk about, say, carbon pricing, clearly that translates into higher energy bill for everybody. And clearly, it's a low-income household that will bear more of the brunt. So we're working with governments, having a lot of discussions and workshops and policy seminars on how to design policy packages that can try to bring all these multifaceted, multiple objectives in a harmonized way so that countries can aim to ramp up ambition on climate action while not leaving anybody behind and bringing the whole society along. It's easy to say. It's hard to do. Yeah. But we keep working on it at the OECD.
Yeah, it's almost too simple to say, let's turn everything off today and we'll be zero, be absolutely fine, won't we? But that doesn't take into account all of the communities around the world, the dependencies, the jobs that are there, and how we have to provide a fair, equitable transition to this new world that we need to be in and take everyone along with us, not leave the people out of the equation. And over these 3 days, and we would have heard hundreds of solutions today, over 1,000 by the time we get to Saturday. For the people here, what's that everyday difference that they can make when they walk out of the room? They won't be overwhelmed with the solutions, but maybe something a bit more tangible they can do in their own lives. What's that 1% change that they can make that, if all of these folks do it here today, will scale up to the big impact that we need?
Yeah. So let's get personal here. And that will be something I ask myself every day. Yep. So leaving my professional life aside, as a person, as a citizen, what can I do? And I'm hoping to find inspiration from this event and this conference from all the exhibitors and audiences and other speakers that we'll hear from later. But what am I doing? Well, in very humble ways, I try to think about how I eat, food choices. And I understand we have a keynote speaker at the end of this session who's going to tell us all about that, on making certain choices about food supply chain and how we can reduce the impact on the environment. How we commute, how we travel, how we heat our homes. There are many ways, and I'm actually trying to find more clues for myself, for me to apply in my personal life in this conference. Thank you.
So actually it'd be about connecting with each other, coming and sharing ideas, sharing personal experiences, and try and build from there. We've talked a little bit of time, Kumi. We're talking about this race, this acceleration, the time that we've got. What does the next year look like for your role, for the OECD? What's success going to look like as we get into COP27, as we start moving into COP28? What does that success look like for OECD?
Yeah. I think we are, living in the decade of action. So as OECD, as an organization that is giving support and policy advice to countries, governments, we are continuing with our effort to achieve net zero transition that's economically resilient, but also resilient in the sense of the ecosystem. And as we know, ecosystem is very intricate. Climate change and its solutions and problems are also linked to biodiversity, ecosystem services, the nature positive economy, that's another a new buzzword today. How to address the linkages amongst different environmental problems that are only exacerbated because of climate change. I mean, water scarcity, the pollution's impact on human health, all this is only going to get worse. So one of the areas that we're going to be looking at is to look at different environmental challenges, including climate change, but to see how they are interrelated. So for the next few years, we'll be embarking on a big project called the Environmental Outlook, OECD's Environmental Outlook to 2060. We're going to make some projections into the future of challenges and different planetary boundaries, and then see how they interact with each other and what governments can do to address these challenges together, ideally. Let's see, stay tuned.
Yeah, incredibly important. And having a platform like COP and then meetings like this as well to be able to advance those conversations and try and break down some of that red tape and the barriers that exist. And I think we'll talk a bit more about breaking down barriers shortly. You mentioned there the resilience piece as well. We know the race to zero doesn't exist without the race to resilience as well. The incredibly important piece to build community resilience and societal resilience. So hopefully we can bring a session onto that next time we come together, because I know one of our speakers coming up working on the campaigns about that too. Any final remarks you'd like to leave people with?
Well, so, coming from where I work, the OECD, I'm probably too focused on government policies. So I'm really looking forward to the next panel where we can listen to and learn from business leaders from a real economy side perspectives. And I haven't yet had time to check out all the exhibitions outside. So I'm really looking forward to what happens after I get off this stage.
Superb.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kumi. That was incredibly insightful into the role that governments have and the success that we can look forward to. And as you perfectly segued there into the next panel piece, is about that role of the corporate and how they can accelerate the race to zero. So I'll thank you very much. If you would like to take your seat and listen carefully into the next moment. Thank you, Kumi. Ready? Yep, great. Well, so the next part is all about accelerating the race in the corporate world, and we've got three fantastic speakers to give you perspectives into, first of all, the role of finance, and we've got Antoine Sire, the Head of Company Engagement from BNP Paribas. If you'd like to come up and join us, Antoine. Take your seat. Yeah, if you want to sit there. Good to see you. And we have Renaud Bettin. Oh, you're sat over there. You're supposed to be in the speaker's seats, Renaud. They're reserved for you. Please come up. The VP of Climate Action at SWEEP. You're going to be talking to us all about the background to net zero and the measurement part of that. And last but not least, I'd like to invite Melanie Jamieson, Managing Partner at Leaders Quest. She's going to talk to us about all important parts of leadership.
Hi.
Melanie,
Hi.
welcome. Thank you.
Hi.
So we've got 80 minutes, it says there. We were supposed to have slightly longer. We're going to jump straight into the questions, everyone, and you'll use those questions to introduce yourselves as well and sneak in a bit about what you do in the organisations that you work for. Renaud, I'd like to start with you because we had a very deep discussion around net zero earlier this week. So I'd like just to pass over to you with the obvious statement that net zero is complex, right? But is it one size fits all for companies? There's net zero, off you go.
The answer is no. It doesn't fit for every company. I mean, net zero is not that complex. It is very well defined by science. Emission absorptions make zero. But for companies, it's not that well defined. Some companies have to reduce their activities. I'm thinking about oil and gas, aviation. Some of companies has to change their business models. But some companies has to emit more because they will help others and consumers to reduce their own footprint. So it doesn't fit for every companies. And I mean, let's get back to the zero. We are entering now in a new generation of action, of change, and but we are probably still stick to the Kyoto mindset. I have to measure, I have to reduce, and then one day I will offset my remaining emissions. And we have to kill that hierarchy. We have to fund the project right now. We have to reduce right now. We have to refine the way to measure. And finally, this is a question of make it collectively. I mean, it's every 2,500 companies get committed to be carbon neutral, net zero, carbon positive or negative. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that we have to reach out these objectives collectively. So we have to create a dialogue. And probably the best answer to ask for a company is, how can I help you? And to answer this question, we have new solutions like Sweep. But let me talk to Sweep later.
We'll bring it back round to Sweep in a moment. Antoine, when I mentioned the net zero based in science, right? We know for corporates that gets enshrined in these standards, a net zero standard, the finance standard, the SPTs, etc. But these take time to develop, and they're always very pointed out that they may not be perfect, and there are changes that need to be made down the line. What's the importance of having the vision, the ambition, the leadership to move ahead of that, to go beyond rather than waiting? And how's that coming to life in what BNP are doing and the Banking Alliance?
You know, we have a lot to do. It's an enormous transformation. It's a huge transformation of the economy. It's a huge transformation of our organizations, of our skills, of our measuring tools, of our mindsets. So if we want to be there on time, we have to start, not now, but we had to start a few years ago. So a few years ago, there was no net zero commitment, there were no such things, and we decided to pull out of coal because it was obvious that this was the first thing to do. After we made the same with, or more or less at the same time, we made the same with unconventional oil. And then we started to understand that we needed to create Paris Agreement alignment tools. And we were among the first banks to develop the PACTA methodology. And today, yes, we have the net zero commitment, but we have a strategic plan between 2022 and 2025. And we consider that whatever we learn through our net zero 2050 journey, it was urgent to have targets that are targeting very close dates like 2025 on key sectors like power generation, oil and gas, automotive sector, and other sectors that are now under review. And a few weeks ago, we published our first alignment report with probably targets on those sectors. I know very little organization in the world, be it banks, governments, or any other kind of organization that has such stringent targets as the target we have put. So, and this is only the beginning of the journey. But yes, we cannot wait. We cannot wait. We have to, each time it's possible to account something, it's possible to take the decision, we have to take it. And I remember, you know, just one other example, and after I leave the floor to Melanie, but one thing, you know, we are now doing things. I remember people in the bank 3 or 4 years ago, they were still asking,
what is carbon?
Why are you doing this? And now, for example, if I take the commitments we have taken on oil and gas. We have more than 400 people that are paid full-time to implement this transformation. So it's a complete revolution. And sometimes people give me figures of 2016 or 2019, and I told them, well, what the hell, a figure of 2019? The world of 2022 is completely different.
I want to come back to the specifics of what you're doing. But Melanie, we've heard here about these commitments. We know about all these initiatives that exist, Race to Zero being one. There's the experts, the science that's there. There are roadmaps and policy frameworks coming out of everywhere across every sector, but there's a bit of a missing ingredient, right? What gets us beyond zero?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to commend, firstly, I think the stringent targets that you've talked about, Antoine, and Renaud, the sort of measuring what matters. And I think you touched on it a little bit, Antoine. What really needs to come into play to bring this all to life is what we'd call wise leadership. So I work for an organization called Leaders Quest, where I've been around a couple of decades now. And I think, like you, Antoine, delighted by the amazing progress that we're seeing and recognizing that with all of those frameworks and policies and targets in place, we need to have a conversation about the role of human beings and how we live up to our name, you know, Homo sapiens, the wise ape. You know, there's no doubting our cleverness. You know, we have seen incredible improvement across many facets of human life over the last century. You know, if we look at infant mortality, at literacy, connectivity, access to healthcare, you know, we see these exponential curves of human progress, but we're also recognizing the negative externalities of a lot of that progress. And that's hard to wake up to. And it takes, you know, I think a real willingness to step in and to listen to some of the hard facts that are happening around us in the world. And to think about, you know, as we are destroying our only home, what's it going to take? How is it that we can really step into the inner wisdom that I think human beings have in their hearts? You know, generosity, compassion, respect, the things that we use in our daily lives. How do we bring that into the way that we lead communities and organizations? You know, I don't think we should be shy of expecting corporate leaders like you, Antoine, and others to really wrestle with how to navigate growth and innovation alongside purpose, how to balance short-term needs with, you know, caring for the planet and the future of well-being generations. And, you know, there's a quote I love from Colin Mayer, the professor from Sire Business School, and he says, "The purpose of business is to profitably solve problems for people and the planet. Business should not profit from creating problems for people and planet." So we work with companies to explore how do you bring those two sentences into all the decisions you make. And, you know, like you, I think, Antoine, I feel a lot of hope when I build that out and imagine what could a world look like beyond zero if we can bring that into our companies.
I love that. The humans got us here, right? But humanity can get us to beyond zero. Melanie, you mentioned, Antoine, again that you were touching on the leadership, and you obviously have a bit more to say about the specifics. You've already taken these ambitious commitments. That takes leadership to do it. What is it that you're doing that the rest of the finance sector, or other sectors for that matter, need to be following, and how is that? How are you dealing with the urgency of this race to zero?
First of all, a lot of people are moving in the industry, in the finance sector. So it's we are among the most advanced companies, but a lot of people are moving. There is an incredible acceleration now, and the more there is this acceleration, and the more it will be easy to do it, because again, we are now doing things. People never heard about that 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's obvious for everybody. So things are really changing. But one thing which is very important is to have the culture of our organization very much oriented towards this. So at BNP Paribas, we started very early. In 2010, we started to finance climate research and to finance a climate research that was really done under the auspices of IPCC people. So really very the IPCC people helped us to design our climate research sponsorship. So we started to finance the research of the climate scientists that would challenge us a few years later. But this was very important. We didn't advertise a lot on this, because if you advertise a lot on this, people will tell you that you are doing greenwashing. So we didn't do that. But internally, within the company, we did communicate a lot and made a lot of sessions where scientists were explaining what we were doing, because we wanted to make BNP Paribas 100% climate skeptics free company. And I can say that today we have succeeded in doing this, because when we create such large teams as the low carbon transition groups, or people who are in charge of modeling the way we will decrease the carbon footprint of what we are financing, the best talent and the best people in the company want to work in it. So and it's fortunate, because these are really the most important and the most promising teams we have in the company. And now we are organizing the fact of disseminating all the skills. And you know, a lot, it's important also to understand that as a bank we have clients, companies, corporates that are doing a lot of changes, that are facing a lot of problems, operational problems to do these changes, and also individuals who want to improve the energy efficiency of their house, who want to improve their mobility solution, and who understand that even owning a big electric SUV is not the right solution. So they are looking for something different, and we need to be the one who helps them to finance this different thing. And we have to organize the company, and this is what we are doing, to have much more listening of the transformation that is run by the client. And sometimes we can see that the people in the company, the bankers that are the most involved in the environment transformation, are the ones who know the best their clients, because they know that there is an expectation from the client. So we have now reached a point that where being a kind of climate activist within the company is a component of a leadership of an executive in the company. And I must say that the biggest activist we have in the company is our CEO, who spends almost 10% of his time on this topic, and who is pushing everybody to go further. But we are the largest bank of the European economy, and we have to deal also with the pace of the transformation. So we listen to our clients to understand the best practices, but when the practice is not in the market, we cannot create it, because we are just bankers. So we are here to give a chance to the best solution, but when the best solution is not here, it's not. It's the limit. You know, we are not the corporates. We are just the bankers.
Yeah, it goes back to something Kumi was saying. In terms of the governments don't pick the winners, but it requires the rest of us to do that. And I also want to go back to something else Kumi was saying in terms of the solutions exist. They might just not be getting the funding to go to scale. And we hear that a lot across sectors. The built environment, I mean, we can reduce heating emissions. We can do a lot of this stuff today. The solutions exist. We're just not utilising them to the full potential. But data has a huge role to play across all of these systems, right? So why is it so important? Why are we not?
I mean, data is key to accelerate. But let's be honest, the climate journey, the collective climate journey, has started 30 years ago. We are in late. We are in late. And we have to recognize that we probably have to fund the adaptation to 2, 3, or maybe 4 degrees of a warmer world. So yeah, let's accelerate, but let's be honest on where we are on the climate journey. So Sweep. Let's talk about Sweep because it's part of the solution, and that's one of the best news of the day. It's such a tool like Sweep. So we are building a software dedicated to run the whole climate journey for big groups, and we are working with BNP Paribas already. And our software, so pure tech product, 50% of the team, half of the team today is just coding every day, developing the product.
Half of them are here, aren't they?
Yeah, not so far from here. And we've built a software that helps companies to implement their climate strategy, not only to create the methodology. So you can collect the data, and I will go back to this, but you can automate the data collection. You can distribute the role within the organization. You can track your reduction actions. You can simulate different scenarios. You can contribute to projects, and of course, you can communicate in a credible way. But what is really important here is there is two main drivers to accelerate. The first one is the data, as you said. So because data is carbon, and if you want to get an accurate carbon footprint, you have to collect the data properly. And most of the time, it's everywhere. I mean, a lot of databases. I mean, this is catastrophic. The data management in the company is just catastrophic. So you have to chase the data. And thanks to our tool, thanks to tech solutions, you can pick it everywhere, and you can track it. You can organize it. You can structure the data to get an accurate and updated carbon footprint, like every month, every week, you get your footprints. And the second driver is the collaboration. And there is two different ways to collaborate for a company, internally, externally. Internally, thank you, Antoine, because I mean, carbon is, until now, is really autocratic. There is, and that's a good news also, there is a carbon expert within the organization, but is the king or she's the queen of the carbon. But we have to divide the power of carbon. So we have to share that power, and we have to give the key of the carbon management to key people, procurement people, responsible of every site, every plant, and help them to reduce their own emissions. So collaboration internally. And externally, Scope 3 emission is just a question of interdependence. And we are all here in that room. We are all breathing the same air. And I think carbon is exactly the same thing. Scope 3 is just a question of interdependence. If you want to reduce your footprint, if you want to reach out your targets, you have to implement a dialogue with your suppliers, with your stakeholders. Again, the question is, how can I help you? And Sweep allows companies to connect the carbon footprint and to make the data at exterior of the organization, the data flows into the carbon footprint. And that's, I mean, this is a revolution. That's a revolution. So today, yeah, the good news is that some tech solutions like this software helps companies to create a new dialogue around climate action.
Yeah. I want to pick up on the collaboration bit as the nice segue into Leaders' Quest, Melanie. This global economy, a lot of losers, a few winners, a lot of diverse opinions about the next steps that we have to take, or the steps that we have taken. So how does LQ approach breaking down these barriers that exist so that we can have conversations with people with diverse opinions?
Yeah, I think the breaking down of barriers in collaboration, as you've described, Renaud, is so vital. And that question, how can I help, is really key. The data and the tools are really key. And I think that one of the things that we humans struggle with is having really honest conversations and leaning into conflict and spending time with people who see the world differently to us. Yeah. So, one of the things that we do at Leaders' Quest is core to our work, which is really bridging divides, bringing together people from all sorts of different backgrounds and walks of life, and creating the space for them to connect at a very deep human level, you know, to connect with each other, to build empathy, to listen deeply, to see life through the eyes of somebody else, to respectfully disagree, but then really to find common ground to move forward. And we do this in many different ways. One of the key ways is an immersive leadership program called A Quest. And we bring this spectrum of leaders from the global to the grassroots, you know, executives together with community leaders, activists, entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, the list goes on. And we spend time really, you know, reflecting on the global dynamics at play and what's happening in the world that's really important to this group of people. And then how does it show up on the ground in the local context with the different people we're meeting with? And really spending time trying to understand the different dilemmas that people are sitting with and why they sit on different sides of the fence, and building empathy and building bridges. And I think that human sort of wise leadership skill is really core to being able to then bring the collaboration, the radical collaboration about, that I think is essential to the whole economy transition that Kumi talked about.
Yeah.
I also think, just lastly, that it's you know, much of the groundswell of the race to zero and the race to resilience that, of course, is growing, I think is down to this kind of radical collaboration, you know, different stakeholders with slightly different visions and goals and numbers and things, but all generally agreeing we need to get to this place beyond zero. And I think that deepening the radical collaboration skill in that movement is really important, because we need to bring in more and more diverse perspectives. We need to be more inclusive and bringing in voices who haven't typically been included in that transition, so we can shape the regenerative future we all want.
Fantastic. I mean, overwhelmingly, it's the word people, right, that's coming through. There are no stakeholders is just a word. Businesses are full of people. Civil society, governments, they are people delivering on this. Right, we're late to the party, but the humanity and radical collaboration can get us there if we ask how I can help. 30 seconds each. I ask Kumi what people can do here today when they walk out. What's that big difference they can make? Melanie, if you'd like to tell them what to do.
So I think for practical tips, Count Us In is the perfect platform for 16 steps, which really come to, I think, Kumi's point of the different steps she would like to explore. Yep. But for me personally, I really think it's about building a bridge with somebody I disagree with. You know, is there somebody who you think, they just haven't got no idea what they're talking about? And just, is it worth spending time trying to understand, well, why are they holding that position? And if I were in their shoes, would I feel something similar? And how is it that I can build a sense of connection and bridge with that person?
Brilliant. Renaud?
Yeah, I think, again, how can I help you? I mean, companies, in terms of contribution, they have to ask people what they need. I mean, in Mali, Benin, South America, people need a roof, need to go to school, need to strengthen the food security. They don't need trees. They don't need trees. They need to live properly. So we probably have to put more social aspects in the carbon. Yeah.
And Antoine, final comment.
Well, I in line with what was just said, I believe that what is essential is that you work collectively. It cannot work if it's a lot of people who know sustainability consider themselves as specialists, and sometimes they tend to believe that they can succeed alone. But this time is over. Now we are in the real life. We have to convince real people. We have to embark real people. We have, as was rightly said by Renaud, to empower everybody to be actors. We have to convince people who have not necessarily exactly the same view. So being a leader, having a kind of team spirit, having the respect for the people will be absolutely essential in this transformation. And it's good news for the world of the business, because we all know that the world of the business has been lacking of humanity in the last 10 or 20 years. And if we don't use the best resources not only of skill but also of humanity we have in our hearts and in our capacity, we will not be able to succeed. So we need to methodology, skills, but also more humanity than ever.
Brilliant. Humanity. Renaud, Antoine, Melanie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of your insights. I think everyone here today, go out of here, find someone to have a difficult conversation with and ask them how I can help. So please give a round of applause to our 3 speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can go. Sit down. Thank you. And for our final chat, I'd like to maybe fill for a couple of seconds, because it looks like a mic's being played with. You good to go? Great. I'd like to welcome on stage Sally Smith, the Global Director of Sustainability from Upfield. Please give Sally a round of applause. Hi, Sally. Come sit next to me. Great. Let the music go down. We've got our timer up. Great. We're going to get a little bit personal here as well, like we did with Kumi, Sally. You tell us about your personal journey into sustainability there. You started off in finance and risk. How did that set you on a path to working at the world's largest plant-based food company?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a different path into sustainability. It's a slightly different path. So I started out in the insurance industry in risk management and risk financing, and then transitioned into a consumer goods company actually in their treasury department, looking at risk from an organisational perspective. And it's quite a traditional 20, 30-year-old way of thinking about organisations and their challenges. But it came pretty apparent pretty quickly that some of the risks, when you thought about it even slightly, were going to be in the space of the environment, whether that's climate change, land use, water, starting from that view of direct impact, but extended into supply chains. So as a consumer goods company, particularly in the food space, that space of risk allowed you to think much more broadly, very rapidly, many years ago about some of the challenges that we face. So my passion for the environment, for climate change, for sustainability stemmed from really quite a practical, risk-based background, but over time I think has morphed to see the great opportunity that what we eat has to help in particularly the climate transition and the world that we need to shift to. So about 3 years ago I moved over to a company called Upfield, who have this very unique, I think, opportunity as a very large plant-based food business. Yes, to look at our own impact, where we impact the environments in which we operate, where we source our food from. But because we're a plant-based food company that provides alternatives to dairy, particularly in the categories of cheese, in creams and in butters, we can help provide solutions that have positive impact. So it's quite unique being a sustainability professional in the in-house arena that actually can join a company that can really lean into that transition space.
Yeah.
So my passion in this space comes from that knowledge that not only can I help manage some of the risks, but perhaps we can push the door on what might be possible here, where some of those opportunities are for the food system.
Yeah. Just got to say a big thanks. I have a dairy intolerant 2.5-year-old who gets very bored of
Yeah,
meals
my
and
nephew
suddenly
as well.
finding
My nephew as well. The
yeah.
notion that you can bake a birthday cake at a kid's party that they come and they love
Yeah.
is really fantastic.
Sad little face at a toddler's party.
Very
so
sad
you can't eat the
faces.
cake. Come over here.
Yeah.
You talked about the sort of environment, climate change, land use, all of these issues that are so relevant to Upfield, and we'll get back to those a little bit later on. I want to talk about something a little bit more short-term, closer to home, and methane. We had a pledge from world leaders at COP26 to reduce methane. Lots of buzzwords around the most critical strategy, low-hanging fruit, sort of the way that we get to 1.5. So how far would this pledge actually get us? What's the substance of it?
Yeah, so I guess, as a plant-based food company, we look at what's happening in the climate space, and we were listening very intently at COP26 and in the run-up to that, and were fascinated by the work that started around the methane challenge, right? UNEP's methane assessment says that 40%, 45% reduction is going to be critical, absolutely critical in the next decade, if we stand any chance of hitting 1.5 degrees. And the reason for methane being important is because it has such an exponentially larger impact than greenhouse gases on average. So methane is 80 times more impactful. It becomes a real imperative to think about it now. And because it has a short lifespan in the atmosphere and it disperses more quickly than CO2 does, if we can tackle it now, we stand a chance of stopping or averting some of those tipping points that might happen otherwise in the system as temperatures increase. And so we're particularly interested in Upfield in this when we look at the conversation that was happening 6 months, a year ago, because the targets under the methane pledge of 30% reduction are fantastic. But if what we're being told is we need to be at 45%, there's a critical gap in action that we see. And we know that those targets that have been announced and the pledge that's been announced is exclusively focused on the oil and gas and fossil fuel industry, yet the food and the agricultural sector actually accounts for the biggest part of it, about 40%. So unless we start to think about methane in the food and agricultural sector, we don't stand a chance of hitting that target, and therefore we cannot hit 1.5 degrees. So we started thinking as a company about what we could do and became very interested in methane and some of the anthropogenic emission discussion that's going on in that space.
Yeah, and of course this is all about the going beyond, right, the net zero piece, and we used to have this 2 degree target, and now we put a 1.5, and that's that doesn't mean that everything's all fine and dandy when we get to 1.5, right? When we look at coral reefs, for example, 2 degrees means they're all gone. 1.5 is we lose 70 to 90% of them, so it's still pretty damaging, and a lot to take on in terms of methane. So where does a company even start understanding where their emissions come from and how they're going to tackle them?
Yeah. So when we started looking at this, I think we scratched our heads for a bit and then talked to some people who know much more about climate accounting than I do as an individual. So the joy of finding experts is part of my job. And
get Renaud back on.
But finding people from all over the place who have very unique spike skills in certain areas. And so we worked with a couple of different consultancies to get different views on how we could do this. And it became apparent quite quickly that if you're already measuring your greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2 and 3, those greenhouse gas emissions are made up of carbon equivalents, of which one is methane. So within the accounting that you're already doing, there is likely to be the data that will allow you to understand what your methane footprint is. So actually, we thought it was going to be terribly complicated because sometimes we can make this carbon accounting thing sound terribly complicated. But I think if you ask the right people, you find that you can do something. And so we were able to both develop a methodology with some partners and have a go at understanding our own methane footprint as a company. And earlier on in the year, we became the first food company to actually publish our own methane emissions. We're quite pleased that we managed to do that. It did take some work, but we're quite pleased that we did.
A lot of work and a big step to take. So everyone needs to come together on a consistent approach then, if they're all going to be copying what you and other trailblazers have done in this space. There's got to be transparency and accountability. That's key across all of climate. But how does that translate in particular for methane then? Yeah,
so I think, let's think about it for a company like Upfield. We're a plant-based food company. We sell a lot of amazing brands, Violife being one of them, a big vegan cheese brand. And so when we look at our methane emissions and we look at our scope 3 and what we purchase, we find that we have a significant methane footprint, right? Being transparent about that, being open, and being prepared to say we see that we have an issue in our supply chain, allows us to both set a bar and hopefully encourage others to do the same. So we think that transparency supports action for others, allows others to step into the space. And also it allows us to be clear about what we can then do about it. It does hold you to account yourself for what you're going to do about the emissions that you have. So what did we find out? We find out that the very, very small amount of dairy that we still purchase from some of the legacy brands, we're only a 3-year-old company, so from some of those legacy brands, actually accounts for 7.5% of our total scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. It's a disproportionate amount for a tiny, tiny ingredient. So we set a target in a very short timeline to remove the rest of that dairy from our categories. So we've set a target to take dairy out by 2025 to eliminate that significant contributor. And when we look at our methane footprint, we see that actually it accounts for 60%, about 60%, a little bit less now, but 60% of our total emissions in terms of methane. So it's a significant driver, that one ingredient, dairy, in our footprint, of our methane emissions overall and of our carbon footprint. So you've got to see it in the context of your total carbon footprint.
Yeah. So let's park methane then. As you mentioned, it's one part of the equation. You're making a lot of progress there. You talked about you touched on the other areas that are key to Upfield. So we need this comprehensive approach to tackle all emissions and going beyond just what's good enough. So just give us the examples of what else you're working on, what's coming up this year, what are the big goals and targets for Upfield on climate action?
Yeah, so we have net zero targets. We look at that target on dairy elimination and on tackling methane as a critical part of an overall roadmap. And when we've disclosed the methodology for this, what we do call for people to do is to show it as part of your carbon footprint and part of your overall roadmap. You can't solely focus just on methane, but we think it's a really important contributor, and we have learnt by looking at it where else we can start to look in our own supply chains to tackle methane and greenhouse gas emissions as part of the emissions associated with some other ingredients that we have as well, rice uniquely being one that we have a protein related to. It might be 20 times less impactful than the dairy factor from rice, but we do buy rice and we hadn't even thought about it in the context of our organisation. So there are things that you can learn from doing the methane emission accounting as part of greenhouse gas emissions that allow you to see other things within your own assessment that you may not have seen. And obviously our focus is on driving action. So we have an innovation roadmap to look at how we can continue to make sure that the products that we make are fantastic for consumers, right? People aren't going to eat them if they don't absolutely adore and love them. So that's a huge part of the work that Upfield does in the food space. I was talking to a friend recently because we did some taste tests of a new Violife cheesecake, little collaboration with another partner, and
an official taste test.
Terribly excited about the official cheesecake taste test. But yeah, there's clearly more to be done in this space, and we would love to see other food companies also talk about their methane emissions and look at it to see what action they can drive to.
Yeah, we were hearing a lot about collaboration and people. You mentioned supply chains there. How important is collaboration through your supply chain to deliver what you need to?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's immensely important. So I think there isn't a stakeholder group, a set of people that we don't love talking to as an organisation because it pushes you to do more. And I think when you're a new organisation and you're thinking about what you're going to do, how you're going to stretch what's possible, reaching out and learning from others is critical. We're never going to have all the knowledge, all the capability, all the thinking in-house. So that ability to reach out and learn from others is absolutely fundamental to what we do. And that goes from the innovators that we work with, the people pushing the science in terms of food as it moves forwards, the suppliers that we have, the farmers that we connect with in some of our supply chains. It spans the whole of that value chain for us as an industry. I don't think there isn't a person we try and talk to quite frequently everywhere. It's the inherent nature of trying to be an innovative food company.
Yeah, and how about cross-sectorally then as well? You
Absolutely.
businesses, civil society, government, a whole economy approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, we would never, or maybe we would have, but you know, we learnt and thought about doing this because we looked at what others were doing. We were looking at what the energy sector was doing and trying to understand if that applied to us, how that might apply to us, what that would mean for us. So the fact that the UNEP and government had been looking at the issue of methane created space for us to think, well, what does that mean in the context of food, and what role can we take with that? Who do we need to bring with us on that journey to set standards, shift the boundaries of what should be reported, could be reported, and how do we encourage others to come with us on that journey?
What's similar question we asked earlier, but what's the success look like in your role in the next 5 to 10 years, this decade of action?
So decade of action for us looks like rapid action on climate change. I think everybody would. So I'm seeing a few nods in agreement. I mean, this is the decade of action for us. That means we hit our climate targets. We cascade them into the organisation. But as a plant-based food company, I think one of my other panel speakers was talking earlier about where the opportunities are, which sectors have to grow in order for this shift and this transition to take hold. And the plant-based food movement, of which we're a part, and it's a huge ecosystem of some super exciting different companies. And if you haven't had the opportunity to go out and taste some of it, I would encourage everybody to do so. That is a sector that there is so much exciting growth and innovation in, and it's, you know, as an individual in the sustainability space, it's really, frankly, fascinating and really exciting to be part of that. So for me, the next decade, I'm thrilled by, because I see that plant-based ecosystem really developing apace.
Yeah.
Yeah, more to come.
So, we've heard that people need to leave here and make better decisions every day. We've heard they need to have difficult conversations, they need to ask for help. I really like making sure their companies are 100% climate skeptic free as well. It feels like a nice badge we can put on. So from your perspective, what's the difference all of these people are going to make today when they leave?
So I think everybody in the room eats something at some point, at least 3 times over the course of the day. So the first thing I would say is, make sure you just try different stuff, right? There's some amazing, it doesn't have to be cheesecake every time, but there is some amazing products, plants, solutions, foods, ideas that are out there. And I think all of us can make that individual choice to eat less meat, eat less dairy, eat more plants, try new products that help us with that transition. And then think about, when you go to dinner with your friends, how you encourage other people to do it. You know, we are human beings that love to share a dinner, a food, a celebration, an occasion. And how do you use your passion to encourage others to do so the same? And obviously, I would say, if you're in a company and you have a footprint that might have methane in it, have a go at looking at it. See if you can measure it. See if you can report it. Be the start of that movement. We talked a little bit earlier about measure what matters, and we know that methane matters. It really matters for 1.5 degrees. So see if you can measure it and do something about it.
Superb. Sally, thank you very much. Very good to talk to you. If you'd like to make your way, I think a round of applause for Sally and for the rest of our speakers today. So that concludes the Race to Zero session. Hopefully you've got a few things that you can go and do when you leave here, a bit of inspiration. But most importantly, please embrace your humanity and go and deliver beyond net zero for all of us. Thank you. Goodbye.